Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Maryann Petri. I have a press release, Family Rights Rally, the Children's Movement, which will happen Saturday, May 21st, 2022 at the Washington Monument, Washington, D.C., Northeast Quadrant, and the hours between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. The sponsor is Family Forward Project. The objective is to unify and provide information and networking opportunities for family dealing with child protective services and child welfare. The mission is to unify all platforms across the nation to make one major statement and demand reform. Many people are speaking out and drawing attention to this injustice through child welfare. This is the time for change. So I encourage everyone to attend that if they can. Right now, I have a brand new guest. I have a single mother of 3 girls. She is also a commercial insurance agency. Her battle began in 2010, and it involved a corrupt CPS agency, her ex-husband, who had married a police woman, and her battle started there. But that kind of calmed down when she got in front of a decent judge. However, in 2015, her kids went for a weekend visit and they just never came back. So I welcome you, Mom, to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
Okay.
Good.
So where are you at with everything now?
Well, like I was explaining to you, my ex-husband abandoned my home and my 3 daughters in 2010. He had committed adultery with a police officer here in Virginia. He left me in a home that was foreclosed. He drained all of the money out of my bank account. And within just a very short period of time, he became very law savvy. I was getting hit with protective orders. I had never been in trouble with the law before. There were show causes being issued, and a lot of things happening very rapidly. He was trying to groom me to let me know that there was going to be a new woman in my daughter's lives, and he was trying to force that very quickly. So I was very blessed. I have a very strong faith in God. So I would like to first start out by saying that if you are going through this battle, you are going to need Jesus every step of the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'll start with that. So after these show causes started showing up, I was very fortunate and blessed that God put someone in my life who was a private investigator. She was a close friend of a friend of mine, and she did it pro bono. She got enough evidence against my ex-husband and the police officer that he backed off. So this went on for several months. The judge involved was crooked, though. It was a female judge, and she kept siding with him on everything. But eventually we had enough evidence that she started to back down. So they did give me custody of my 3 daughters in 2010. Fast forward as the years went on average, I went to court between 6 and 7 times a year for frivolous show causes. Now I would call that vexatious litigation, but at the time didn't realize what was happening. He became further and further behind in child support. So the first thing that I noticed was I was selling insurance to a guy who was really embarrassed because his license had been suspended. And he said, "I'm really sorry about that, ma'am. I got behind in child support. And here in Virginia, if you get behind, they can suspend your license." So my wheels started turning, and I'm thinking, well, my ex-husband is about $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 behind at this point, not paying regularly. He's now had children with this woman, two boys. And I said to my client, "How far are you behind in child support?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said $800. So I was pretty shocked. Went to court to try to get this child support money. And every time I went there, it was the same female judge who was from Lexington, Virginia, and she also served in Stanton, Virginia. So I began to ask around when I was in the waiting room, other people there for child support cases. I said, hey, do you guys always get the same judge? Because this woman was there, I mean, rain or shine. Every time I walked in the door, she was there. So she drove from Lexington to Stanton. That's a 45-minute drive to be present at my hearings. So they all replied to me and said, no, we always get someone different. These judges rotate in and out. So that became very suspicious to me. At one point, his oldest daughter, who lived in Florida, contacted me before court. So the day before our hearing for child support, she said, my dad's going to bring you $2,000. And we went to court the next day. It's the same judge. And mind you, I'm kind of skipping a part where he would brag to me that he was talking to a judge who was giving him advice and counsel. And he would tell me, I'm gonna get out of paying the support. I'm only gonna have to give you maybe $400 a month. And I said, no, it's probably gonna be like $700 or $800. We have three daughters. So I kind of stored that in my memory bank. But I said, well, wait a minute. He told me that a judge was giving him advice. And at the time, again, I don't know if you can do that or not. I'm an insurance agent. I'm not a lawyer. So we go to court and the judge orders him to pay exactly $2,000. And at that point, all of the red flags went off. And I stood up and I looked at her and I said, did you just order him to pay exactly $2,000? And she said, yeah. And I said, aren't you the chief judge in Lexington? And she said, yes. And I said, and you're here in Stanton, Virginia, every time we walk into the courtroom. And I said, that's interesting because his daughter told me yesterday he was bringing exactly $2,000. So I left and went to the Division of Child Support office where he and his police officer girlfriend went in to make the payment. I waited in my car. I was reading a book. Of course, I'm going in to get the money that I've been waiting for. And two police officers show up in a patrol car. I was smart enough to document and videotape everything. Just instinctively from being in my field, we document every conversation in a management system, to avoid any E&O claims or, any kind of misunderstandings with the insurance world. So I was in tuned enough to know I've got to record this stuff. I videotaped those officers. They, I felt a little bit threatened. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was sitting in a car reading a book. Anyway, when they came out, I went into the office. He did, in fact, pay the $2,000. I asked for a copy of the cashier's check because I thought for sure it would have been purchased the day before, and then I would have really had hard evidence that this judge was crooked. But no, he had actually purchased it that day, so the dates matched. I did file a complaint with the Judicial Review Commission in Richmond, and she recused herself. So fast forward to 2015 now, I'm still taking care of my three daughters. He's now $11,000 behind in child support. And my two oldest are in middle school, and they're getting at an age where they start to talk back a little bit more. They would go to his house every other weekend, come home and, give me a little bit of grief about putting away the dishes or just being rude, talking back. And it did get old. I did get frustrated with them. This particular weekend that they went to their dad's, I brought them back to the house. There was a lot of whispering. Basically, we're mouthing off saying that, my dad said, I don't have to listen to you anymore. We can just go live with him. He's going to get us an iPhone and everything's going to be great. So I instructed my daughter who had been talking back to go get a wooden spoon. And I met her in her room and I popped her 3 times on the hind end with a spoon. Some people might not agree with spanking. I'm sorry if you don't. It's part of being a parent. Sometimes you spank your kids. So it left no bruise. For 2 weeks, she went to school. She had friends over. We had family and friends at our house. Normal routine. 2 whole weeks goes by. She goes to her dad's again. The spanking incident comes up. He then calls his wife's friend, who is a police officer in the county that I live in, tells them that my kids are being abused and he needs to make a police report. They also were fortunate to know a child protective services person in Lexington, and they reached out to her as well. I think her first name was Betty. So between Betty and the officer and my ex and his girlfriend or wife at the time, they had concocted a story that was so egregious and outrageous and ridiculous that it's incomprehensible. Sunday came and I was getting ready to go pick my children up just like I would normally. We used to meet in a halfway point in Racine, Virginia. And before that time came, Child Protective Services came to my home with police officers to inform me that my children would not be coming home. I asked what the allegations were and I recorded it. So I had an actual voice recording of this and I took down notes. The CPS worker basically said what the allegations were. She said that I was physically abusing my children, and they were basically just trying to sort some things out at that point. So I started to study the Child Protective Services manual. I pulled it up online. My kids obviously did not come home. I am in a frantic state of mind at that point, but trying to keep it together. And I knew better than to lose my cool in front of CPS or the police officers. So my first thing was reading as much as I could about CPS. And I found out very quickly from reading their manuals that they just can't do that. There has to be an investigation. They never asked me a single question. They went and got an emergency protective order. And the craziest thing about it is the judge that I just spoke about that recused herself was the same judge that signed it. So she recuses herself and then signs a protective order several years after recusing herself.
The corruption continues.
Yes. There's a whole bunch of details. I hired and fired several attorneys that were just worthless. They did a lot of talking. They took my money. I felt like they were having, side conversation with the CPS attorneys and that kind of thing. I went to court at one point, and now the story kept changing. So when the CPS report came out, and I got to see some of the affidavits and the show causes that my ex-husband had written on, they said drug use by mother in front of children, verbatim. Never done drugs in my life. It was just shocking to me that he would write that. He also said that I was having sex in front of my children. He said that I took all of their clothes and belongings to Goodwill. So to address the first accusation, when we went to court and I saw that, it made me so angry that I left the courtroom and I went straight to the first drug testing facility that I could find. And I walked in and I asked them to fully test me for everything, just like you would for employment. And I paid for it myself. Now, the guardian ad litem in my case at that point was wonderful. She knew my ex-husband from 2010. He had given her an awful hard time about meeting. He was very secretive about his police officer girlfriend. So she was kind of on to him. I reached out to her, gave her proof of the drug test. Of course, it was all negative. Go back to work. A few days later, Child Protective Services calls me, and I'm thinking, logically, they're going to be relieved that they've come across information that exonerates me from doing drugs, and they're going to say, okay, sorry, that, let's get together and work this out and get your kids home. No, that's not what happened. These people came after me even harder after I passed a urine test. They demanded that I go get a hair follicle test. They called me and said, you have approximately, I think it was 30 minutes or an hour. I can't remember, but it's a very short window of time. You have to leave your job right now, get up and go take a hair follicle test where we tell you to.
Mm.
And if you don't do what we're telling you within this window of time, it will be an automatic positive. So then they threaten you with that. I have nothing to hide. So I
Mhm.
went and took the test. I waited for several days, didn't hear from them, called them multiple times. Nobody would ever answer my calls. Finally got them to answer the call, and I said, hey, did you get the results from the test? Of course, I know that they're negative. They were angry that the test results were negative. The next thing was they wanted a psychological evaluation. The women that worked at the CPS agency, I have to tell you, it's bizarre because they're usually these very heavy set women who are not married
Mhm.
and don't have kids of their own. They're not usually very bright. Um, they're almost witch-like.
And their
The
hair's usually off to the side and sticking up, right? Like
Yeah,
Dr. Seuss hair? Mhm.
yeah, and these are large women usually.
Yes. Mhm.
Um, and they're telling you how to live your life. And I've always been a person that works out, lifts weights, had a big garden when my kids were little, canned vegetables. I work really hard. So to have somebody that kind of looks sloppy, unkempt,
Mhm.
disheveled, telling you that you need to take these drug tests and you need to jump through these hoops and psychological evaluations, it's mind-boggling to think somebody puts you in charge of a department that makes decisions on where children live.
Mhm.
It's pretty strange. So I remember getting into I would meet these crazy ladies at public places like the library, and they said, you have to go take a psychological evaluation, and you have to do it where we tell you to. That's always a big thing with them. We have these special doctors and places that you need to go to do these things. And I told this woman, I said, no, I said, I can read, and the
Mhm.
court order says I have to take a psychological evaluation. It doesn't say anywhere that I have to do it with CPS. Well, then the next thing they threaten you with is the expense of it. It's going to cost a lot of money, and we pay for it. Well, of course you pay for it because the person that's evaluating me is probably in your pocket.
Mhm.
I said, well, I don't really care what it costs. I'm going to get my own professional and do the psychological evaluation. So I went with a doctor in Stanton, met with him. My psychological evaluation, I have it here, probably should have grabbed it, basically says that I am above average intelligence. I have a good job. That was being truthful during the interview. It was like 700 questions. I am psychologically healthy.
Mhm.
So for months and months, I was denied any access to my children over a spanking. So now you've got this story coming unraveled. There's no drugs. There's a clean psychological evaluation. So several months into this, I find out that I'm being direct indicted by the police officer who is friends with my ex-husband's wife. Direct indictment is a secret meeting where you're not even involved. So you have no due process. You're not interviewed. I was never interrogated. In fact, I never even saw this police officer until we went to court. So they direct indicted me on a felony, reckless disregard for human life, and abuse of a family member for the spanking. So now I have two lawyers. I've got a family law attorney out of Roanoke, and I had a criminal attorney out of Harrisonburg. When I was dealing with the criminal attorney, he did no discovery of any kind. He had a private investigator that I'm thinking is going to help me in my case. He ends up basically interrogating me, and asked me a whole lot of questions to see that if my story changes. There was a lot of pressure on my end to see if my story changed. And of course, it never changed because I was telling them the facts and the truth. Um, so I kept asking them, what is the charge? I mean, when you charge someone with reckless disregard for human life, I need to know what act happened that would cause them to charge me with this, because the definition of that charge is you've done something so wanton and culpable that it was going to result in the death of a child. So he would send discovery. They would try to send a motion to quash. I couldn't get the discovery from what the police interviewed the children.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't get any information. Eventually, the story was that I allegedly did drugs, but obviously the drug test proved that to be false. Then the story was someone I knew, a friend of mine that came over, did drugs, but then they realized that that wasn't going to fly either. And then they said someone came to my house and talked about it. So now, you know, they're using that for the whole year to intimidate me and coerce me. I was under duress, and I'm very obstinate. And one of the women who was a judge used to be my lawyer. And I heard through the grapevine that she told them, this woman is not going to back down. She's extremely obstinate. You're not going to intimidate her. I asked for a jury trial. I wanted the community to see and hear what was happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
They were using that felony charge to keep me under stress, hoping that I would buckle, and then they could justify why they illegally removed my children. We got to the end of the year, still hadn't seen my children, and my own attorney started to really push me. And he had been talking to the prosecutor there, and he said, if there's even a 1% chance, he said, they have a picture of a bruise on her hind end, and they're going to show it. If there's even a 1% chance that you could go to jail on a felony. And I told him, I said, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. I'm not going to prison. I said, I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not going to back down from this.
Mm-hmm.
I had a few other colorful words. I think I told him he could tell the prosecutor he could go F himself, is pretty much what I said. He then threatened to quit on me. So 2 days before my jury trial, they forced me to take a bench trial. They dropped the felony because there was never a felony. It was all made up in their kangaroo courts. I took a bench trial on the spanking. I paid $700 for the transcripts that I have. My lawyer would not let me testify, told me absolutely not, over a spanking. My child testifies. She got spanked on the hind end, 3 pops on the rear end with the wooden spoon. You can hear the judge, the judge is on the transcript saying, you've presented a picture. What am I looking at? Dry skin. He's like, I don't see a bruise. It had 0 evidence of anything. When we cross-examined the CPS people, they couldn't tell you the dates or times. They didn't have the files. Whenever you call them, they never have the files. If anything happens, well, that wasn't me, or I need to get a supervisor. You get bounced around and juggled around. At one point, I went down to their office just to get a copy of their manual. And I have the video recording still. And the 2 women were so upset that I was asking for the manual, they called the cops on me. So if you ask any questions, they call the police on you. At that point, we get past the criminal stuff. The judge, I did not testify. So the judge gave me 2 years probation for the spanking, and then it was dismissed. Now I have the green light to go and attack all these protective orders that have been keeping them from allowing me to see or speak to my children. Now, mind you, in your last podcast, the woman that you interviewed from New York, who's the grandmother, you have the opposite happening. The father has murdered the mother in front of the children, and the CPS there is forcing that relationship. That is sick.
It is.
In my case, you would have thought that I ripped my children's arms off and beat them to death the way these people were behaving. I was like, this is insanity. And I also want to say my children have never been sick. They have never been hospitalized. There is no evidence or history of family abuse in our family at all. No alcohol abuse in the past. I have no criminal history. So, single mom, working commercial insurance, supporting all three of my children by myself. He's 11,000 behind in child support. And that's all they had was a spanking. So in the trial, he gives me the 2 years, everything can be dismissed. At that point, I fired my attorney and wanted to represent myself pro se, and I started to attack the protective orders. Mm-hmm. Now, the turning point in my case, I will say that not all judges are bad and evil. I did have several that were good. Mm-hmm. This particular judge in Stanton, when I challenged the protective order, I did my own case. I did a timeline where I cross-examined my own child. I presented pictures of everything that had happened in that 3-month window where all this abuse allegedly took place. Mm-hmm. I presented the picture. I identified where we were, the date, and I just asked her, were you abused or harmed in any way on this night? And she said no, and I flipped the picture down. The next picture could have been like the Christmas parade. Did you attend this Christmas parade on December 12th? Blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Yes, that is me in the picture. Were you abused or neglected or harmed in any way on this night? No, I was not. And I flipped the picture down. About the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th picture in, the CPS attorney jumps up from his desk and he yells at the judge and says, how long are you going to let this go on? And the judge said, as long as it takes, because now I'm getting a different picture. And mind you, I had already cross-examined those CPS workers. Their voices trembled, their lips shook, they were terrified. It was obvious to the judge at that point that something was going on. So after the timeline, I had to take the stand, and the attorney for CPS cross-examined me. So now it's the same judge who he got me with the 2 years probation for spanking my kid. He charged me with that crime. Now I'm going back in front of him again to get this protective order dismissed. So I get on the stand. The attorney for Child Protective Services says, so you were convicted of child abuse or for hitting a family member? And I said, yes, I was. He said, so you're a child abuser? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, so are you saying that this judge was wrong when he charged you with, the family abuse? I said, no, that's not what I'm saying. So the judge, he was pretty cool. He looked at me and he said, whatever you say, I'm not going to hold against you in this trial. And I said, that's fine. I understand. And I said, can I answer the question? And this is where I want to just stop real quick and just say how big God is in intervening in these things, because the words that came out of my mouth next, I didn't say. I really believe that the Holy Spirit moved through me and God stepped in, and he told me the day before court that he was going to be with me. So I knew that he was there. Mm-hmm. So I said, here's what I think. I said, given the lack of my testimony on my criminal hearing and the testimony of my child, who I believe is under duress, I said, I think that the judge did what any reasonable and prudent person would do in the eyes of the law, because he didn't have all the information. He didn't have the full picture, because I was silenced and told to shut my mouth or my attorney was going to quit, take the bench trial or you're screwed. The judge sat back in his chair and he looked at the CPS attorney and he said, I bet you weren't ready for that torpedo in the water. Mm-hmm. And then he told him he could pick his jaw up off the floor because he just lost his case. Mm-hmm. And that was the turning point. The protective order was then dismissed. But, it takes a lot of money and a lot of willpower. You cannot have any quit in you if you're going to fight this battle. I worked 2 jobs for 2 years. I lost my job as an insurance agent because I was charged with a felony. I was immediately terminated. I lost my home. I lost all my belongings. And, the thing with the system and how these people are able to exhaust parents and they're committing suicide, they will bleed you financially. And it took everything I had. I had to go sell cars for a couple of years, and I waitressed. I had days when I made $1,000 a day. I could sell 3 cars. We call that a hat trick.
Mm-hmm.
And then go waitress and make $150 to $200. So you're talking, I was on my feet for 13 to 15 hours a day some days. And all that money was going to lawyers. And then in the midst of all this, my ex-husband hit me with child support. So
Typical. Mm-hmm.
when somebody already owes you 11 grand, you talk about a shocker. I mean, they ordered me to pay over $700 to someone who already owed me $11,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen my children, and I could not get a straight answer as to why I couldn't see them.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I did have to go and stay with some family to get my insurance licenses back. Tried multiple times to get in touch with my children. Did not see or speak to my children for 5 years. So, you know, very, very long, hard battle. I will say that so throughout that process too, what God kind of instructed me to do was I would go sit with people on Wednesdays when they had the CPS hearings,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just sit there in the waiting room and listen to their cases. And if an opportunity presented itself, I would start talking to people and families in the courtroom, and they'd tell me a little bit about their interaction with CPS. We would exchange numbers, and then I would meet them and later interview them. And what I found was a lot of these people were in a similar circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of them were, you know, pretty poor, lack of education, didn't have the means to fight CPS, didn't have the wherewithal, and they seem to target those families.
Mm-hmm.
Just recently, I'm starting to feel like we have a lot more hope because they're starting to cross over into people that are a little more educated, a little bit tougher, people that aren't going to let this slide, and we are getting connected. So I'm very blessed to be part of that. Do you have any other questions or?
Well, it's great that you said, you know, we're getting connected. The people are starting to fight back. You went pro se, I went pro se.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tried to run it through federal and made it up to the appellate court, but the corruption was so deep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but that's what it takes. And like you said, a lot of prayer. People don't realize that you're up against, and I hate to sound melodramatic, but I think you're up against demons.
Absolutely. No, these people they're pure evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very satanic system, and
Yes.
they get off on it.
Mm-hmm.
They love to hurt children. They love to hurt parents. The more weakness that you show to them, they delight in it. They really enjoy it. The other game that they played with me after I got the protective orders dismissed is chase the case.
Mm-hmm.
They kept moving my case around from this jurisdiction to the next jurisdiction. And, you know, I thought I had another decent lawyer. She was full of it too. And, you know, they just couldn't seem to even know what court to file in. They had moved things around so much. The other interesting thing that I thought was funny, most people don't realize this, but do a little research on the judges, the CPS attorneys, the people in your town that operate in the kangaroo courts. The one guy in Stanton, Virginia, had been arrested for beating up his wife. So, I mean, the nerve of these people, yeah. I don't know. I don't think he was convicted of it, but was charged with it. Mm-hmm. You know, so the person who's telling you how to raise your kids, if you can spank them or not spank them, or what's abuse and what's neglect, is actually been accused of beating the crap out of his own wife.
Mm-hmm.
So,
mm-hmm.
you know, that kind of thing goes on. I know another case here in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's a personal friend of mine, went to high school with this girl, and I'm not going to talk too much about her case, but it's you could write books about this stuff. I mean, these stories should all be Lifetime movie, television for women stories, and I know that they happen to men as well. And I think too, it's worth mentioning that a lot of women are now coming out and speaking out against it, because it was something that used to only happen to men. The second part of that too is, it's like, if you lose a child, if your child dies from cancer or a car accident, you have people that will rally around you and support you, and you're grieving the loss of a child. So imagine these families and these men and women who've lost their kids for something so ridiculous. You're grieving the loss of your child, but you can't tell anybody, because the second that you tell them, their reaction is, well, you must have done something wrong. CPS doesn't take children away from people or come after people unless they're abusing their kids. So that amplifies the pain and the trauma that you're going through, because there's no support system for you. If you're being raped, victimized, and abused by the corrupt court system and these people, there's no relief. You almost have to keep it like this strange secret. And when I did start to interview other people, that gave me some strength. And then I was able to find some groups and individuals on Facebook. I don't know if you've heard about Raymond and Amelia Schwab. That was a national case where he wasn't putting up with any shit. He was a Navy veteran. I think they had 5 children from him for alleged marijuana abuse, and he went all the way to the Supreme Court. So anybody out here who's heard of Raymond and Amelia Schwab, that story is worth looking up. I also had contacted Kimberly Lowe several months ago, and I remember talking to her, and then I heard her again on your podcast. And I woke up the other morning and I thought, oh man, I have her cell phone. So I've reached out to her. Yeah, reached out to her, and her and I are going to try to get together and talk. I think, and I also talked to Ben Tomes, actually. He's very nice. I reached out to him. We have similar thoughts and ideas, and I just want to share those really quick. We can talk about these stories all day long, but unless we have some action behind it, it's pretty pointless. And I think that people need to start exposing this, but it would be nice if we had some groups, like in my area of Virginia, if I could find a group of people that could show support and go to court with each other and pray, that would be huge. But also, the courts are very crafty, and they'll put gag orders on people. So if you do anything or talk about your case, the one girl that I know that's going through it in Charlottesville, if she even talks about her case, she could go to jail. She's completely terrified. But then say I can't talk about her case. So I think we really need to come up with some battle strategies on how to expose this, how to change the laws. I mean, we all have the same opinion on, you go into a courtroom, it's all secret. You can't take a cell phone in there. They really don't like you taking a court reporter. So some quick tips that I think everyone should know if you're dealing with Child Protective Services is get ahead of the storm. They're going to ask you for a drug test. Just go take it on your own. And if you have a guardian ad litem, because they're always trying to cram a guardian ad litem down your throat, get that information to them. If you know you don't do drugs, go take a test before they can ask you to. Because they're going to try to send
test.
you. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, if you can afford it. And that's the thing. Some people don't have the resources. I was able to pay for my urine test. I didn't even know what a hair follicle test was. So take that test, get it to the guardian ad litem, or at least have that documented, because they're going to try to get you to go to someone that they have in their pocket, and then you might have a tainted test. So that they're not they're not afraid to do things like that, CPS. Psychological evaluation, they're definitely going to ask you for one.
Mhm.
Document and record everything. I know in the state of Virginia, as long as one person knows that you're recording, it's legal.
Mhm.
Do your own research on that. Don't take my advice. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just telling you what I've read. And always have a court reporter.
Yeah, definitely. But even still, in one of my cases, it was a CPS. I was trying to get exonerated from emotional child abuse, but the CPS attorney, because I was telling the judge how this caseworker was acting, with her hair off to the side, wearing pleather cowboy boots, screaming at me, and he said he actually said in a meek voice, "Why didn't you ask her to leave?" And I replied, "I was afraid she would take my kids away." And that's
Mm-hmm.
not in the transcript. How did
Oh, so that was just left out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe because he said it so softly, maybe they didn't catch it. But why didn't they catch what I was saying? I was afraid she was gonna take my kids away, which she did.
Mm-hmm.
Very successful because they can lie and get away with it.
Well, in my criminal hearing, they have to have a court reporter in there.
Mhm.
So I remember when I went to get the transcripts for that, the clerk at the courthouse was really trying to deter me. And she said, "Well, what do you want them for?" So they'll actually, like, if you think you have rights in the United States of America and you watch these shows about courtrooms and family court, it's all bullshit. You
Mm,
have zero rights. I'm here to tell you that it can happen to anyone, anytime,
right.
anywhere in this country. I don't care if you're a doctor. I don't care if you're a school teacher, a nurse, an insurance agent, an MMA fighter, whatever. If they want to take your kids, they answer to no one. There are no checks and balances systems. Um, they lose kids in foster care all of
Oh,
the
yeah.
time. I
Mhm.
lived in Florida for a while and came across the news. It was like a quick blurb, and then you never heard it again.
No.
They'd lost thousands of kids in the foster care system. So going back to me just trying to get the transcripts, I was questioned, why do you want them? Well, it's going to be really expensive. They charged me $700 for the transcripts that I have. And I said, well, do you want a check, cash, or money order? So yeah, it's the constant, trying to question you and deter you. I'm going for custody right now of my 15-year-old who's still living with her dad. My children and I had reunited 2 years ago, and we've had a great 2 years. But unfortunately, their dad is a narcissist, and that brainwashing and that trauma is still very much there. He still has custody of my youngest daughter, and filed pro se for custody. We have a hearing in June, so everybody keep us in prayer for that. But just calling the school to get her transcripts, refusing to give me her school reports. And 6 months ago, I'm on a Zoom call, just like I'm talking to you right now, and going over her schoolwork with the teachers. So they know she has a mother. Yes, I know that I don't have custody and that he does. But my parental rights have not been terminated. In the state of Virginia, and I cited the code, you have to give me her transcripts. And I went through this when she was in elementary school, and the attorney I had at that time did get the school records. But again, everything's a fight. So I had to call the school board. I got a guy on the phone. He called me at my office the other day, and again, I can't say they're all bad. He called me right up and he said, "You're exactly right." He said, "Your parental rights are not terminated. You have a right to the records." And he said, "What would you like me to get for you?" And he's getting the report cards and the attendance and that kind of stuff. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, if you think you have any rights and you think you're going to go to court and you're going to subpoena something, my interrogatories were just blocked.
Mhm.
No reason. I emailed the court and said, "Why are my interrogatories being blocked?" They're pretty basic questions, asking my ex-husband, like, "Where do you work? Does anybody else live in your home? Do you use marijuana?" Pretty basic stuff. No answer yet on that, so we'll see.
Hmm.
Um, it's it's rigged, and you
It
know
is rigged.
the cards are stacked against you, and unless you've experienced it, um, there's too many of us now that would call it a conspiracy.
Hmm.
I mean, you've got, you know, healthy professional people that this is happening to,
Hmm.
and they're starting to talk about it. So you can throw that conspiracy shit out the window,
Hmm. I feel it should
because
be abolished.
yeah,
Abolish CPS, the family court. Get rid of
oh
foster care.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. They need to go through all of that database. And
Hmm.
here's the other thing about CPS, and I think this will kind of resonate with some realtors and other insurance people or people in the medical profession. You know, I saw life insurance, for example. If I write a life insurance policy on you right now, they can look at your MIB, your medical insurance, your medical history, and they'll know within about 15 seconds if you can have this life insurance or not.
Hmm.
The DMV, you know, has all of your records. They know when your insurance lapses. They'll send you a fine in the state of Virginia if they find out you don't have insurance. So all these systems are connected. We use management systems in the business world. We use Zoom. We use all types of, you know, resources to save data and manage people's accounts. Child Protective Services and the courts have no management system. There's no records. There's no it's not fluid at all. They present it as if it's like this, they're in this dungeon of a building and they're still using paper files. All of that is very intentional.
Hmm.
It's an excuse to keep things in darkness, and that's how they hide this stuff.
Hmm. Oh, you're very right.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree they should all be abolished. There's more harm than good. I mean,
Hmm.
and not to mention, if you do the research, they get federal funding for every child that they remove from a home.
Hmm.
So there's a financial incentive there to do it.
Hmm. Yeah,
And I
they
don't
got.
think,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I feel they should get. Uh, I don't know how we're going to do this, you know, but I would like to see Title B, D, and E completely gone, and all those
Absolutely.
incentives that are destroying these families, and no one cares.
Yeah. And it's kids for cash. And I mean, I don't
Hmm.
know, I'm not as researched as some of the experts on this as far as, you know, where all the money goes, or how they get it. But I do know that it's happening. I did a lot of research on Nancy Schaefer, the senator
Hmm.
from Georgia. And, you know, if you don't think this can happen to you, I'm sorry, I have to tell you it can.
Hmm.
This woman just started looking into the matter when she was getting flooded with calls from people whose children were being removed by CPS for nothing.
Hmm.
And she's dead.
Hmm.
You know, murder suicide, I think, is what they ruled it.
Hmm.
Um, but there's lots of people who have come up against that. I mean, I was very fearful at one point because, you know, I felt like there were a couple of times that police officers would show up at my job. I was terrified of cops for a very long time, because every time I turned around, I was getting arrested. I've been charged with 3 felonies in this state. One has been expunged. And that's actually a funny story. Is the reckless disregard for human life felony was expunged. They couldn't expunge it fast enough. And here's the really creepy part is the clerk called me more than once and kept reminding me that I needed to get down there to expunge it. So they wanted to get rid of it.
Huh.
When I went to get the expungement, I was sitting there in the courtroom, and some smug attorney, little dirtbag, was
Hmm.
sitting next to me. And he said, "What are you here for?" As if it's any of his business. But I told him. And he said, "Oh, getting an expungement is very rare. It's very rare." And I looked at him and I thought to myself, well, hold my beer. Watch
Hmm.
this. Because
Hmm.
I'm not here because I initiated this. They kept calling me to remind me, you can get this expunged. I went up there to get it expunged. The judge didn't say a word to me. The other people that were there for expungements, he asked them, basically to grovel and to beg and tell them what a piece of crap they were and why they should get an expungement. They knew who I was. I mean, my name is pretty much famous in that area, I guess. I know all the judges and the attorneys. That he looked at me, didn't say a word, never asked me a question, just hit the gavel, boom, expunged.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at that attorney who's questioning me, and I'm like, do you see how easy that was to get an expungement?
Yeah.
It's easy when they want to get rid of something, evidence that they did something to you to keep you under duress. They expunge that really quick. And then because of the chase the case stuff, I went to purchase a firearm. I've always owned a firearm. I had a concealed carry permit because I'm a single woman. I go out to meet people on their farms. I write farm insurance. So yeah, you just never know. When my kids were little, I always carried. My kids kind of laughed about it. Like, mom's got her 9mm. But I've come from a family. We've got a lot of military people in the family. I've been around guns, felt very comfortable with them. So after all of this stuff was done, I went to purchase a shotgun for home protection. It was around the time of the last election. There was a bunch of stuff going on. I said, well, I probably should go get a firearm. Well, because they had moved my case around so much, they were still showing a protective order in one county, but it had been moved to a different county and dismissed. I got charged with 2 felonies, paid another lawyer for 6 months. She did absolutely nothing for me. She was worthless. I had to go to the courthouse myself and get evidence when the protective order was dismissed, but I couldn't figure out what county it was in. Finally get that. We get it to the prosecuting attorney, and he drops the charges. So, I mean, you go your whole life, without committing a single crime. You're a professional, responsible adult. When my children, right before they were taken, basically kidnapped and given to their father, the kids that came to my home, we lived on a cul-de-sac. The children that spent the night at my home, their friends that were at my house all the time, their parents were probation officers. So my kid's best friend, spending the night at my house three times a week in the summer, my child's going over there and spending the night. Their parents come in my house without really even knocking, because it was such a, in and out. I'm cooking dinner and Jordan's dad is there and he's standing in my living room, and I turn around, oh, hey, how you doing? That's how close the kids were. Well, when my stuff happened and I call on these people and I said, I might need you guys to come and testify, they don't want any part of it because they're all in bed together. The cops are married to the clerks that work at the courthouse. The probation officers are married or family with the people that do the parenting classes or the anger management classes. The CPS lawyer plays golf with the judge. I mean, you could connect these dots. And that's another thing we got to start thinking outside of the box, is start connecting the dots and exposing it that way. That has nothing to do with your case. If you say, did you just know that so-and-so is married to so-and-so? Judge so-and-so is married to the parole officer, or the cop is married to the family court clerk. The other thing that I noticed they do is, if you look at their employment history, somebody might work for CPS for a year, and then they'll transfer them to the sheriff's department. So they're getting experience in all these different areas of the law in the state. Or if they get into trouble, this one's classic. The cop who arrested me is dumb as a box of rocks. He is a moron. I researched cases that he had charged another woman with reckless disregard for human life, and it was dropped. He also tried to charge a farmer here locally for a marijuana plant. So if you own a farm, let's say you own a 50-acre farm, and some teenagers stumble on one corner of your property and plant 2 marijuana plants, you may or may not know about it. If you have cows in a field and you're looking at fence and cattle and stuff like that. You might not notice 2 or 3 marijuana plants. This idiot found the marijuana plants by flying over this guy's farm in a helicopter, and this is documented. So I'm not, I'm not just speaking out of the side of my face. I read the court case. He drags this guy to court and it gets dismissed. So this cop that direct indicted me too had a history of, just screwing up royally.
Mm-hmm.
He even came to a hearing at one point, and was out of his jurisdiction and didn't seem to know that that was a thing. So the judge is like, well, what county do you work in? And he says what county he works in. She's like, you're not even in this jurisdiction. I can't take your testimony. So I will say, in my case, the majority of the time it finally got to a judge, I did get some relief. So I'm not going to sit here and say all the judges are scumbags in the state of Virginia, because that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
They've ruled in my favor actually more than they've ruled in my ex-husband's favor. The problem is getting to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So if you document everything, your lawyer is not going to help you. You better learn to go pro se, find somebody that can help you get your case together. Most of the judges I've found here, if you follow the rules of the court, if you don't ramble and you present evidence, they will listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
I just filed a motion for medical records that I thought the judge was never going to issue, and he actually did.
Mm-hmm.
So, these are the things that are going to help you along the way, but you got to get intel on who you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know how they're connected. You got to talk to other people in your community.
Mm-hmm. And also to be very persistent, don't just give up even when things look really bleak. You've got to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you came on. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that pretty much covers it. I would just tell all of you guys that are going through this that there is relief. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Don't give up. Don't let any thoughts of suicide come against you. I rebuke those thoughts right now in the name of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, prayer works. I will close with this, that when my case really started turning around is when I got really serious about prayer. And the scripture says that the fervent prayer of the righteous availeth much.
Mm-hmm.
God started to show me several ways that I could bring this to him, mm-hmm. and he will have judgment. There were actually 2 people in my court case that mysteriously passed away. Both very crooked, nasty lawyers that were helping my ex-husband. They died mysteriously, whatever, some illness. I think one had a heart attack. There was a guardian ad litem. She was a total witch, in Harrisonburg. And we prayed before the court case. My friend was with me. She's known me for 15 years. And I don't know what came over me that day, but I said, Lord, if one person comes into this courtroom today and opens their mouth to lie or say something malicious or nasty or practice any kind of witchcraft, I said, I just pray, Lord, that you just grab their tongue and they start to cough, choke, and gag on their own words. And we said that prayer, walked into the courtroom, and the second that woman got up to speak, I kid you not, you would have thought she had swallowed a whole potato chip. Mm-hmm. I mean, she started coughing so violently that I thought she was going to throw up. She was so embarrassed that she ran, sprinted to the door so she could get out in the hallway to the water fountain. Mm-hmm. The judge looked like he wanted to crawl underneath the desk. That actually happened twice. And then I also had a friend who had a run-in with Child Protective Services. We kept praying for her too, and that chick fell out in the courtroom and her case was dismissed. Mm-hmm. So I'm telling you guys, there's power in prayer. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I can share a little bit more on that and, how that whole process works and what God showed me. But that's really the greatest weapon that you're going to have towards victory in this is the Word of God.
Definitely. How can people reach you, or how do you want to be reached?
I think email would probably be best.
Okay. What is your email?
Okay, the email that I would prefer that they use is diva, DIVA, cook, COOK, Lisa, LISA at gmail.com.
Okay, and I will put that in the podcast notes. So I'm so glad you came on. I'd like to have you back on again in the future.
I would love to. I'll keep you updated on my court case that I'm dealing with right now.
That would be great. That would be great. Well, hey, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again here, and we will have more exciting guests. Thank you so much for popping on the show.
Thanks for having me. This has been a great experience. I hope it helps a lot of people.
I think it will. Thank you.